Welcome to Roundtable Decision. In honor of Father's Day, I thought I would do a video to represent fatherhood, as fathers play a very important role in all of our lives. You can look up at any statistics politically what represent how fatherhood has a positive impact, such as the gun rate in African American households who are without fathers, or any place where fathers are absent. There always tends to be a statistic in the opposite direction. So therefore, fathers do play a tremendous role. But I've noticed something in the past, that fathers in Hollywood or fathers in movies tend to be quite the opposite in this approach. And in this video and in the clips are trailers from movies I am going to talk about. And not all fathers in movies are negative, or play negative roles. But a few do. But I was going to start with one what does play a positive role, and then we'll get into more of the negative roles. To Kill a Mockingbird in the 1960s was about Atticus Finch. He was a lawyer and a good father, and in the story, the book and movie is told through the perspective of his daughter. But he is the perfect example of who a father should be, through an honest man who represented a black individual who was blamed for raping a white daughter, a white female, and the father of the daughter played a role in the story as well. And he was kind of the opposite father figure, as someone who was so set in his ways of racism that he was the portrayed of a bad father in the story. So a father who was more open and more willing to tell through the story was the better father, as told in To Kill a Mockingbird. And I have a couple of movies I was going to talk about, and the first is American Beauty, which is in 1999. And this was a story of basically two fathers. The first father was a father who was having a midlife crisis and then wanted to sleep with his teenage daughter. Yeah, you heard that. His teenage daughter. This isn't exactly a good reputation of who a father is supposed to be. And the second father was more of a homophobic nutcase who was living a lie throughout the entire story. And obviously, these two representations of fathers are not fathers who you would want to be. And the list goes on with the movie There Will Be Blood in 2007, where he took on he was the father, and his child had a work accident, and then he used his work accident to acquire some rich land of oil, and then later abandoned the child, and the child then became the killer. So therefore, his dad in that movie was portrayed as the bad guy of the story, since he was the one who was directly responsible, well, sorta directly responsible for his son going mad. And then in The Godfather 3, you could argue that the main father of the story was the person responsible for getting all of his sons involved in the act itself. And of course, the bullet, what happened in the story where he shot Mary, or Sophia, who was the actress, in the church stairs, which is one of the more famous scenes in the movie. And then, of course, you have The Shining in 1980. And this is kind of an interesting one because this movie starts off with the father directly being a crazy man or a person who has gone mad. And he loses his grip on reality and his wife, and then his son Danny, who lived in a lodge in the off season, like a hunting lodge. And so, long story short, they were alone, and this guy started to attack them, or started to play jokes with them. And it turned out that this person was their dad of the story, the crazy man. So they're portraying this father as a crazy person, and therefore in the story he's represented as the bad guy. And then you have Matilda, or I think that's how you pronounce it, Matilda, in 1996. And their parents were both bad, but the father was more of a hilarious type of over-the-top, crazy, abusive, general army sort of type of father who was loud, rude, dishonest, and completely brutal and short-tempered. And in his dealing with their daughter, Matilda, he would make remarks at her for how bad she was or why she isn't a good daughter and things like that. So obviously, this is not the father you would want to have in movies or want to have in your life. And then you had Chinatown, which is in 1974. And this is ultimately of the father being a thief, murderer, and incest type of roles in the movie. And in the movie, it's very much a topic of the father himself who challenges self in Los Angeles and tries to profit on criminal activities. So they're portraying this father as a criminal. And then, of course, you have the famous scene in Star Wars where the dad, Darth Vader, cuts off his son, Luke Skywalker's hand. And of course, we all remember the scene with the duel and the lightsabers, Anyway, we all remember that. And then, of course, you have the line from that movie, Luke, I am your father. And then, this iconic, one of the most famous lines in movie history, at least recent movie history. And of course, this father was represented as their bad guy throughout the entire movies, as being Darth Vader, the person who wanted to destroy all of the known world. And then the Hulk, in 2003, was the story of the abusive father who made this Hulk, who through DNA altering and progression of wanting to make a superhero, ended up making this Hulk. And the dad of the story wanted to do this so much that he was willing to ruin his own son's life in order to make this super soldier Hulk creation. So it's ultimately a story of a father being over controlling through his son and wanting it his way and to create something more than himself. And then you have Boy's Life, which was in 1993, which is again another story of a lousy stepfather who had a bully and an abuser, and instead of trying to be a better father, he ended up abusing his son. And so that was ultimately a story of a father abusing his son, which we've heard already. And again, not a father you would want to have. Then you had The Tree of Life, which was in 2011, where Brad Pitt plays a harsh father in Texas in the 1950s. And it's a story of ultimately nature and a remark of the father as being a nightmarish figure, somebody who was the evil of the story. The nature is what wanted to be saved, but he was responsible for what was happening with the nature. So again, he was the bad person of it. And then of course you have the iconic Rosemary's Baby in 1968, where the father wanted to make his daughter have Lucifer's baby, or give birth to Lucifer's baby, being the devil's baby. And it was the stepdad who was in charge of the exchange with the devil for this to happen. So ultimately, he was most definitely the bad guy of the story. Then you had Natural Born Killers in 1994, where it was a physical, sexual, verbally abusive parent for his daughter, and then the daughter then became a serial killer again. So again, we've heard the same sort of progression of several movies already, where the father was abusive and then later the person he abused became a serial killer. So ultimately, it's a story of the father made the serial killer, made the person to become a serial killer. Therefore, the father is bad and is the reason why it happened. And then you had Hell or High Water, which was in 2016, one of the more recent movies. And in this movie, it's about a bank robber determined to keep the family land at all costs. And the father was abusive to the mother, and that's probably why Tanner, who was the son of the story, or the person who was trying to keep the robbers from owning the land, killed himself. And then there's That's My Boy, where he went to prison for tax evasion. And then you have Austin Powers, who, this is more of a simple-ish one, where you had Dr. Evil, who was the father, who's frozen for most of his life, and then later he disappointed that his son wasn't as evil as he was, and his father, being the evil one, wanted world domination, war domination, war domination. Excuse me. And then I was going to add one other one. What I've noticed was Step Brothers, where you had the father who was the stepmother's father, or stepmother's husband, and essentially he was the bad guy of the story because he didn't want the one son to be there, rather than the mom who had that stepson or wanted him to obviously be there with her because that was her son. And it was a story of how he was trying to get accepted in the father's life, and the father didn't want it to happen. And then of course it happened at the end of the story, if you've seen Step Brothers. And then there was one other movie what I found that a lot of people said had the bad father figure. And this one seemed a little goofy to me, but I thought I would end with this movie in particular. And that is Transformers Age of Extinction in 2014. And that was, of course, a Michael Bay movie. And the father, Cade, had this shop where he secretly had a Transformer. And the government eventually found out. And so the person argues that through the government figuring out where it was, he put his daughter at risk because all the guns were there, and his daughter could have died, and his daughter ended up being directly involved with car chases and a whole bunch of other stuff what happened in the movie. So he was the reason that he put his daughter at risk. But on the other side of that, he was a good father for keeping her from getting taken or keeping her from getting shot directly. He did all he could to involve her enough to be safe, in other words. So, to conclude the video, I just thought it was interesting to talk about how movies, from almost their very start, have created fathers to be almost a bad sort of image in movies. And I do think this needs to change, because fathers need to get represented, and true fatherhood needs to get represented in a better way, because fathers are what give us our life and give us our desire to keep going, and they give us guidance, as the Bible always says. The Father is who gives us guidance. And of course you have the Father of God, but you also have your physical father who's here with you, and that he's supposed to guide you through things. You're supposed to be willing to ask your father questions. And not everyone has a good father, but fathers ultimately are important. And I thought to end it, I would share a clip of a Toy Story 4 review, and it's not going to spoil anything, but it was good to hear that in this review that Woody was getting represented as a father, or represented as a father type of figure to the toys, as he kind of always was, but more especially in this movie. And I thought that was refreshing to hear, because it's important that the better father figure or father image in movies is important, because it gives you guidance.
In Toy Story 4,
thank you for watching the video, and stay tuned for the clip.
It felt shorter than its runtime. It was consistently entertaining, and it is yet again another fantastic Toy Story movie. If I were to try to talk about flaws, I feel like I would be reaching a lot. It's there. I know I can find it. And there's a flaw. I got it. It's right here. Oh, yay. I found a flaw. Look at me. Good for me. I would say my only issue with the movie is that I wish there were more